You find yourself standing before the soot-darkened door of number 12 Grimmauld Place, the ancestral home of the Black family, a house that seems to breathe in the dust and exhale disappointment. The wallpaper is older than most ghosts, and the portraits that line the walls mutter under their breath, as though they've been gossiping for centuries and can't quite remember how to stop. Somewhere deeper inside, beyond the heavy velvet curtains and silver candlesticks polished by resentment, you hear the faint scrape of a chair. Perhaps it's Regulus himself, the forgotten son of a family too proud to love properly. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Because what you're about to hear isn't a story of heroism or grandeur. It's about a boy who tried to be perfect in a house that worshipped blood more than truth. So, before we begin, tell me something. I'm really curious. From which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tread through the dim corridor, feeling the weight of a family tree so heavy it's been burned into the wall, names scorched off like forgotten sins. The Blacks, an old wizarding dynasty obsessed with lineage, as if purity could replace kindness. Regulus Arcturus Black was the younger son, born into a world of expectations sharp enough to draw blood. His older brother Sirius rebelled gloriously, roaring through life like a meteor that burned too brightly to stay. Regulus, in contrast, was the quiet one, the dutiful son who listened when their mother shouted about honor and heritage. He wore obedience like armor, and it fit him far too well. You can almost see him now, sitting by the firelight while his mother, Walburga, lectures on the noble and most ancient house of Black, her eyes blazing like a chandelier about to shatter. "We are not like them," she'd hiss, meaning muggles, meaning kindness, meaning anything outside their narrow view. And Regulus, only a boy, would nod solemnly, believing every word because to disagree meant exile. It's almost funny, that the one who stayed home ended up being the one who truly betrayed the family's creed. The history books barely mention him. Even the Order of the Phoenix whispered his name like a rumor, unsure whether to pity him or thank him. But every story starts somewhere, and his began right here, in a house that was both cradle and coffin. Historians often argue whether Regulus was born loyal or made that way. One scholar in the Wizarding Archives once suggested that his loyalty was less to ideals than to the idea of belonging. A poetic way of saying he was lonely, really. But there's a fringe theory, too, one that claims the Black family's magic had grown so intertwined with its ancestry that it produced an invisible curse. Every generation bore one child doomed to question it all. Maybe that's why Regulus felt different. Maybe that's why he looked at the tapestry one evening, his eyes tracing the burned mark where Sirius's name once was, and realized that purity had no warmth, no comfort, no future. Still, what choice did he have? You wouldn't survive growing up in a place like this, not without learning how to smile when you wanted to scream. You can picture him walking the long hallways, the ancient floorboards creaking like disapproving ancestors, his reflection warped in every framed portrait. To them, he was hope reborn, the Black who hadn't strayed. To himself, he was a shadow of someone braver. Even the family house elf, Creature, treated him with a reverence usually reserved for saints or lunatics. And Regulus, poor Regulus, mistook obedience for affection, mistook fear for love. That's the tragic irony of his youth. He thought loyalty could fix loneliness. It's strange how families work, isn't it? The ones who shout the loudest about pride often have the most to hide. Grimmauld Place may have been protected by enchantments, but nothing could keep out the slow rot of arrogance. The curtains sagged, the wallpaper peeled, and the magic itself felt tired, as if the house knew it was keeping secrets, even it didn't want to remember. As night deepens, you imagine the boy lying awake in his four-poster bed, the flickering firelight painting constellations on the ceiling. Orion, Sirius, Regulus, all stars doomed to burn alone. You almost want to whisper to him, to tell him that one day he'll matter more than he ever dreamed. But he wouldn't believe you, not yet. He's still trying to make his mother proud, still trying to fit into the shape of the perfect heir. And that's where our story begins, with a boy who thought the world was divided neatly between good and evil, only to learn that the real danger lies in the space between. You wake to the soft hiss of morning in Grimmauld Place, the kind that feels like the house itself is reluctant to start another day. Dust motes float through slanted beams of light that slip between thick curtains, and somewhere down the corridor, an enchanted portrait clears its throat with aristocratic disdain. This is Regulus Black's world now. Breakfast at a table too large for the remaining family, silence thick enough to be its own curse, and the endless echo of expectations. You can almost smell the burnt toast and the faint hint of potion smoke clinging to the wallpaper, reminders that this was a household where affection was replaced by instruction and warmth was considered a weakness. His mother, Walburga, sits like a queen in exile, her sharp eyes cutting through the gloom as she recites the family motto, toujours pur, always pure. You can't help but think that nothing rots faster than purity. Regulus listens, head bowed, repeating the words with a composure that would impress any pureblood elder. He has learned the language of silence, of nodding at the right times, of being invisible while still being perfect. As a child, Regulus was everything Sirius refused to be: tidy, polite, careful, the golden echo of the Black family's dying pride. While Sirius ran through the halls like a wildfire, Regulus sat quietly in the corner, tracing runes from old spellbooks and wondering if power could make the loneliness go away. His parents mistook obedience for strength, never realizing that it was fear wearing its best manners. There's something deeply unsettling about watching a child shape himself into a ghost just to survive his own home. Historians tend to romanticize the era of old wizarding families, but behind every tapestry and chandelier, there's a quiet graveyard of forgotten children. One particularly bitter scholar at the Department of Mysteries once described the Black lineage as a constellation of misery pretending to be the night sky. She wasn't wrong. By the time Regulus reached Hogwarts, his family's reputation followed him like a hex. He was sorted into Slytherin, of course, where the whispers of legacy and power curled around him like smoke. He was the younger brother of a rebel, the son of the infamous Walburga, the heir to a house that believed in superiority as religion. To most students, he was the polite one, the one who smiled just enough but never quite laughed. But in those quiet moments by the lake, when no one was watching, he sometimes stared into the water as if it might tell him who he was supposed to be. You probably wouldn't survive the social circles he moved in, where charm was a weapon and friendship came with fine print. There's a quirky little detail in one of Slughorn's old diaries, buried in the Hogwarts archives, claiming that young Regulus once won a house award for exceptional discipline in study, not brilliance. Discipline. Even then, he wasn't trying to be the best. He was trying to be correct. Sirius would write from Gryffindor Tower with letters full of rebellion and jokes, and Walburga would throw them into the fire unread. Regulus would watch the flames and wonder which brother was truly the free one. He told himself that loyalty meant safety, that playing by the rules meant survival. But the walls of Grimmauld Place don't let anyone leave unchanged. By his 5th year, whispers of the Dark Lord had become shouts. Voldemort's influence seeped into Hogwarts like cold fog through an open window, and Regulus listened to every word. The rhetoric was intoxicating. Order, power, destiny. The promise of belonging to something greater than himself was irresistible to a boy raised in isolation. When the mark came calling, it wasn't evil that seduced him. It was purpose. The world beyond the Black family's suffocating expectations seemed suddenly vast and alive, and Voldemort's voice filled that void with meaning. You can almost hear it. The quiet thrill of being noticed by someone whose name alone made grown men tremble. To be chosen felt like being seen for the first time. Still, even in those early days, there were cracks forming. Creature, the devoted house elf, once told a story about finding Regulus in his room late one night, staring at his reflection and whispering, "What if we're wrong?" The elf didn't understand, of course. He only polished the silver and nodded, but it's haunting to imagine a teenager already burdened by the suspicion that everything he'd been taught was a lie. The academic debate over whether Regulus was a believer or a bystander still rages in wizarding history circles. Some say he was naive, others claim he was cunning from the start. The truth, as always, probably lives somewhere uncomfortably in the middle. You picture him writing to his brother one last time, a letter that never reached its destination. Maybe it said everything he couldn't say aloud. "I tried to be what they wanted. It's killing me." But the owl never left the perch, and the ink dried in silence. The house would never allow such weakness to escape. And so, the boy who once wanted to make his family proud began to turn into a man who would question everything. The irony, that questioning would make him more like Sirius than he'd ever dare admit. You stand once more in the common room of Slytherin House, the torches flickering along the damp stone walls, green reflections rippling like serpents across the ceiling. It's late, well past curfew, and Regulus sits in the corner, his face half lit by the dying fire. Around him, the other boys boast of the Dark Lord's growing strength, of their father's secret meetings, and their mother's gifts of family gold to the cause. To them, it's thrilling, like gossip from a forbidden book. To Regulus, it feels like inevitability. He doesn't speak much, only nods at the right moments, his eyes drifting toward the shadows as if they hold an answer he isn't ready to face. You can almost feel it, the subtle pull of destiny disguised as peer pressure. That's how it starts for many, not with hate, but with belonging. The thrill of being part of something powerful, of being told you're special in a world that rarely notices your quiet kind. By 16, Regulus was already known as the Sensible Black, the one who would restore his family's name after Sirius's disgrace. You can imagine the pride in Walburga's voice echoing through the Black family's portrait hall. "My son serves the Dark Lord. My son knows his place." It's ironic, really, how often pride sounds exactly like fear when spoken out loud. Voldemort's early recruits weren't just fanatics, they were dreamers with terrible aim. Some wanted glory, others justice. A few just wanted to stop feeling small. Regulus fit neatly among them, quiet and disciplined, the boy who didn't question orders because questioning never ended well at home. But somewhere beneath the dutiful mask, doubt simmered like a suppressed curse. There's an account in an obscure wizarding journal, barely circulated before being banned by the ministry, claiming that Regulus attended his first Death Eater gathering in a manor near Bath. The article describes him as pale but resolute, a whisper among roars. It was said he didn't speak a single word that night. He simply watched Voldemort command the room with a kind of terrible magnetism, every gesture calculated, every silence louder than thunder. You probably wouldn't survive standing in that circle. Few could endure the weight of that gaze without flinching. Even the air seemed thinner there, as if the Dark Lord drew oxygen as tribute. Regulus, ever the perfectionist, thought that loyalty was a shield. He didn't yet understand that with Voldemort, loyalty was a leash. It's said that during those years, he became a master at pretending. To his family, he was the golden son. To the Death Eaters, a promising recruit. But inside, he was splitting in two. Hogwarts professors would later recall how he grew quieter, colder, as though the light of youth had been siphoned out of him bit by bit. Some students whispered that he had cursed a Muggle-born girl in the courtyard. Others swore he defended one from Mulciber. No one ever knew which was true. Historians still debate it. Was Regulus cruel or conflicted? The consensus leans toward both. After all, being trapped between what you're told and what you feel rarely produces heroes. It breeds ghosts. The summer after graduation, Grimmauld Place welcomed him back like a mausoleum, expecting another occupant. Walburga celebrated her son's new connections, filling the house with guests who smelled of perfume, money, and quiet menace. Sirius was long gone, disowned, burned off the tapestry like a stain. Regulus never mentioned his brother aloud, but sometimes late at night, Creature would find him standing before that charred spot, whispering something the elf couldn't quite catch. You'd think guilt might show itself in tears or confessions, but for Regulus, it came as stillness, an exhaustion that settled deep into the soul. There's a fringe theory, mostly dismissed by mainstream historians, that suggests Regulus had already begun feeding small bits of misinformation to the ministry's informants by this time. No solid proof, of course, but several coded letters recovered decades later bear his handwriting, hidden among counterfeit reports of Muggle sightings. If true, it means he was playing both sides before he even understood his own motives. Perhaps rebellion ran in the family after all, just in quieter tones. You can almost hear Sirius laughing at the irony from wherever he was hiding then. His little brother, the obedient one, risking everything while pretending to stay loyal. In one memory, Creature preserved, fragmented, but chilling, you see Regulus pacing his bedroom, muttering the same line over and over. He doesn't care about us, not any of us. The he is obvious, though Creature refused to say his name. Maybe it was that night that Regulus began to see the Dark Lord not as a savior, but as a parasite, feeding on devotion until there was nothing left. Voldemort's obsession with immortality was no secret among his followers, but few grasped what that meant, what it cost. Regulus would learn soon enough. And yet, for now, he stayed. He smiled when expected, bowed when called, and signed his letters with elegant precision. But you can sense it, the slow, inevitable drift toward something darker than darkness itself. Regulus Black was walking the thin, dangerous line between duty and conscience, and though he didn't know it yet, that line would soon become a noose. You can almost feel the weight of the mark before you even see it, that faint, shifting shadow beneath the skin, a promise and a curse all at once. It's not as dramatic as people imagine. There are no drums, no lightning bolts, no cries of allegiance echoing into the night. Just a silent room, a single wand, and Voldemort's voice low and deliberate as he presses eternity into your arm. Regulus sits there, jaw clenched, the smell of cold magic and iron in the air, and for one dizzying moment, he feels chosen. That's how it gets you. The illusion that devotion makes you strong, that obedience makes you safe. The burn on his skin is unbearable, and yet he doesn't flinch. He wants the Dark Lord to notice that. You'd probably scream. Everyone does the first time. But Regulus was raised to believe that pain means you're doing something right. When he returns home that night, Grimmauld Place greets him like a cathedral. His mother's portrait beams with pride. The ancient curtains stir as though the house itself approves, and Creature weeps with joy, kissing the hem of his robes. Master Regulus is great, the elf murmurs over and over, as if saying it could make it true. For a brief time, Regulus allows himself to believe the same. He attends gatherings, learns coded rituals, hears whispers of a new world to come, one purified, one reborn. He writes careful letters to other Death Eaters, his words measured, his tone reverent. But beneath the elegance, there's a crack forming. Voldemort speaks often of loyalty, yet every order demands surrender. Every task draws a little more of Regulus's humanity into that dark mark, like water disappearing down a drain. The official historical accounts, written much later by survivors who could barely remember the details, describe this period as the quiet before the shatter. Voldemort was consolidating power, the ministry in denial, and the wizarding world pretending not to notice that disappearances were becoming daily news. Regulus, young and clever, saw both sides, the cruelty of the world he served and the fear of the world he left behind. He wasn't blind, only bound. The academic debate about his motives still rages. Was he too afraid to leave or already planning to betray? One rather eccentric historian once theorized that Regulus was acting as a double agent from almost the beginning, but others call that wishful revisionism. The truth, as always, lives in the smallest moments, like the way his hand trembled after every mission, or how he'd wash the mark in scalding water as if it could be undone. It's strange to think that for all his loyalty, the thing that began breaking him wasn't a moral awakening, but pity. There's a small, easily overlooked entry in Kreacher's recollections. The elf once found Regulus in the library at dawn, staring at a Muggle-born prisoner's photograph that had been used for propaganda. She had eyes like starlight, Regulus whispered, and then tucked the photo away, ashamed that he'd felt anything at all. That's the cruelest part of indoctrination, the way it teaches you to be embarrassed by your own empathy. You imagine him walking through London one evening after a meeting, his cloak drawn tight, the street lamps flickering like dying spells above. The war is everywhere now, in the headlines, in the whispered curfews, in the eyes of people who cross the street when they see his robes. He feels the pulse of the mark whenever Voldemort calls, and each time it's like being yanked back into the fire. Still, he obeys. Still, he plays the role. But inside, something shifts. He begins to see the other Death Eaters, Mulciber, Avery, the Lestranges, for what they truly are. Zealots chasing chaos, confusing cruelty for conviction. You probably wouldn't survive a single dinner with them. They laugh at suffering like it's a sport. Regulus learns to smile politely while his stomach twists. There's an odd historical footnote here, an old pensive memory, believed to be Snape's, where a young man's voice, most likely Regulus, says, "He makes us less." The statement is cut off, the memory blurred by time, but the meaning is unmistakable. He was beginning to see the pattern. Voldemort didn't build followers. He hollowed them. He didn't lead. He consumed. And in that realization, the smallest spark of rebellion, lies the beginning of Regulus's fall. One night, in the cold silence of Grimmauld Place, Regulus removes his Death Eater robes and folds them carefully, as if performing a funeral. He places them inside an old trunk and stares at his arm, tracing the mark with a trembling finger. Kreacher watches from the doorway, worried but obedient. "Master should rest," the elf says softly. Regulus only smiles, a sad, almost gentle smile, and replies, "Rest is for those who stop trying." It's a haunting line, one historians love to quote, because by then, he wasn't fighting for power anymore. He was fighting to find the smallest fragment of himself beneath all that darkness. The first real crack in Regulus Black's faith doesn't come from a battle, a betrayal, or a revelation. It comes from the quiet voice of someone who was never meant to matter. Kreacher, the old house elf with trembling hands and eyes full of devotion, becomes the mirror Regulus never asked for. It begins innocently enough, on an ordinary evening in Grimmauld Place. The candles burn low, the wallpaper sighs with age, and the air feels heavy with secrets. Kreacher is muttering to himself as he polishes a goblet, his voice carrying a tone that is more fear than reverence. "Master Regulus should not have gone," he says under his breath, and Regulus, curious, asks what he means. What follows changes everything. Kreacher tells him, in broken, reluctant whispers, about the test the Dark Lord commanded, the one where he was taken to a hidden cave, forced to drink a potion that tore through his body like fire, while something terrible stirred beneath the Black Lake. Regulus listens in silence, the words coiling around his mind like serpents. Voldemort had used Kreacher not as a servant, but as bait, to test whether his Horcrux enchantment would hold. And when the elf collapsed, screaming, the Dark Lord had simply left him there to die. Kreacher only survived because of his obedience. When Voldemort departed, he had whispered his master's name and apparated home, dragging the memory with him like a curse. As Regulus listens, something cold and irreversible blooms inside him. It isn't rage, not yet, but recognition. He sees his own reflection in Kreacher's story. Loyalty repaid with abandonment, devotion turned disposable. "He left you?" Regulus asks, barely above a whisper. Kreacher nods, trembling. "He left Kreacher to die." The words echo in the silence, and you can almost hear the moment Regulus's certainty shatters. Voldemort's grand vision, his promise of order and power, it was all a lie built on cruelty. You'd think that realization might come with anger or tears, but it doesn't. Regulus simply stands there, still and pale, as if the air has thickened around him. "Tell me everything," he says, and Creature obeys, describing the green potion, the voices, the shadows moving beneath the water. Historians later called this conversation the awakening of Regulus Black, though there's no record of the exact words exchanged. Some say he spent hours afterward pacing, muttering about the cost of immortality. Others believe he sat perfectly still, thinking of nothing at all, because thinking meant feeling, and feeling hurt too much. There's an academic dispute about whether Regulus already knew what a Horcrux was before that night. The mainstream consensus says no, that he pieced it together afterward using old family grimoires. But a lesser-known theory published in the Wizarding Historical Review by a rather passionate scholar named Tilden Appleby argues that the Black's library contained early dark magic texts referencing soul-splitting rituals. Regulus might have recognized the signs immediately: the locket, the potion, the protections. If Appleby's theory is true, then Regulus didn't just realize what Voldemort had done, he understood how he'd done it, and that knowledge was poison. You picture him standing before the family tapestry, his eyes drifting from Sirius's burned-out name to his own, glowing faintly in the candlelight. For the first time, he sees it not as lineage, but as prophecy, a web of arrogance, destined to consume itself. He turns to Creature and says, "He can't be allowed to win." The elf stares at him, confused. "Master Regulus speaks against the Dark Lord?" Regulus doesn't answer directly. Instead, he kneels so that they're eye level, something no Black had ever done before, and whispers, "You were right to survive." It's such a small act of kindness, but in this house, it feels like revolution. There's a fringe rumor, recorded by a former unspeakable, that Regulus began keeping a secret journal around this time. A small black notebook charmed to vanish when touched by anyone but him. No one's ever found it, but supposed excerpts surfaced years later, likely forged, containing lines like, "If loyalty demands cruelty, then I've served the wrong master." Whether real or not, the sentiment rings true. He withdraws from his former comrades, citing illness as an excuse, and begins spending long nights in the library, studying protection spells, infernal enchantments, and old Black family wards. He's no longer the obedient son. He's a man quietly preparing for treason. Still, the transformation is gradual. You can sense his inner tug-of-war each time he looks at the mark on his arm. It burns when Voldemort summons his followers, and every time he ignores it, it burns hotter. Creature begs him to stop defying the call, but Regulus just smiles wearily. He has many servants. He won't miss one. That's the kind of joke you make when you've already accepted how your story ends. One of the last confirmed sightings of Regulus comes from an old ministry file. A shopkeeper in Nocturne Alley recalled him purchasing a large quantity of enchanted water flasks and protective runes for deep exploration. When asked what he was doing, he simply said, "Cleaning up someone else's mess." It's a line historians love because it's so tragically perfect. Regulus, the boy who once served blindly, now planning to undo the work of the man he once worshipped. You can almost feel the inevitability closing in. The sense that every choice he's ever made was leading to this. The son who lived to make his family proud will die to redeem its name. It begins with silence, the kind that feels deliberate, as if the house itself is holding its breath. Regulus Black has made up his mind. You can almost hear the clock ticking somewhere in the dark, each second slicing through the air like a countdown. Creature stands beside him, wringing his hands, whispering warnings that go unheard. The plan, though simple in design, carries the unmistakable weight of death. Regulus intends to return to the cave Voldemort once used, the one Creature described with shaking voice, and retrieve the locket that hides the secret to the Dark Lord's immortality. He must not keep it, Regulus says softly, the firelight flickering across his face. He isn't angry now. He's calm in that eerie way of people who have already accepted how their story ends. The scholars call this the turning tide moment, when ideology collapses under the gravity of conscience. You, standing there unseen, can feel the inevitability crawling up the walls like ivy. There's something almost noble about how he prepares. He writes a letter, though no one will ever find it, and slips it into an old copy of magical theory. He instructs Creature to obey every order, no matter what happens, and the elf's eyes fill with tears, as if he already knows. "You will come home," Regulus assures him, "and you will destroy what we take." The elf shakes his head violently, muttering, "No, no, Creature will not leave Master Regulus alone." But Regulus only smiles, the kind of smile that breaks hearts centuries later in retellings. "You must," he says, and that's that. Historians still debate whether Regulus understood exactly what a Horcrux entailed. Most agree that he did, that by now he had pieced together the truth. But the fascinating academic debate isn't about what he knew, it's about why he acted. Some claim guilt drove him, the burden of his family's legacy pressing down until redemption became his only escape. Others argue it was love, not for his brother, but for Creature, the only creature who had ever shown him devotion without expectation. And then there's the fringe theory, proposed by a particularly dramatic scholar from Durmstrang, that Regulus had glimpsed a prophetic vision of Voldemort's downfall and saw himself as a necessary sacrifice. A premonition of balance, the paper called it. Most of the wizarding world dismissed it as romantic nonsense. But you have to admit, it's a beautiful idea. As he gathers his cloak and wand, Regulus moves through Grimmauld Place like a ghost rehearsing his own haunting. He passes the tapestry one last time, running a finger across Sirius's scorched name. "You were right," he whispers. You can almost hear the words dissolve into the air, absorbed by the house that has witnessed generations of regret. Then he turns to Creature, who's clutching a flask of enchanted water and trembling uncontrollably. "We're going to finish what he started," Regulus says, "and we'll do it properly." It's such a quiet declaration, but in that whisper lies the most extraordinary act of rebellion a Black has ever made. In some alternate telling, perhaps in a history rewritten by dreamers, this is where someone would stop him. Maybe Sirius bursts through the door, or Dumbledore intervenes with a warning. But life, as usual, offers no such mercy. Regulus walks out into the night with only his courage and a terrified elf. The moon is waning, the stars scattered thinly like old parchment ink, and the world feels impossibly small for what he's about to do. There's a surviving testimony, half-burned and stored in the Ministry archives, allegedly written by a Death Eater who once saw Regulus in those final weeks. "He spoke little," it reads, "but when he did, his words sounded like farewells." It's a chilling line, not because of what it says, but because you realize that by then, Regulus wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of leaving the world unchanged. You'd probably run if you knew what he knew, that to challenge Voldemort was to invite annihilation. But Regulus, in his quiet way, does not run. He spends his last night reading by candlelight, the walls humming faintly with the remnants of old spells. When the flame gutters out, he doesn't relight it. Instead, he stands in the dark, listening to the city breathing outside. London at war, the Muggle war above and the magical one below, both equally blind to the small act of defiance about to unfold beneath them. Somewhere far away, a church bell tolls midnight. Regulus looks at Creature and nods. It's time. The elf grips his arm tightly, and with a crack of displaced air, they vanish into the night, heading toward the Black Lake, toward the end that will make him immortal in silence. The cave waits where the sea carves its secrets into stone, a jagged wound in the cliffs, older than memory, echoing with the hollow breath of the tide. You follow Regulus and Creature as they appear on the wet rocks, their cloaks whipped by salt wind, the moon slicing pale ribbons across the water. Every instinct in you screams to turn back. The air itself feels wrong, as if it remembers the cruelty once committed here. "Stay close," Regulus whispers, and Creature nods, clutching the enchanted flask like a lifeline. The entrance reveals itself only when Regulus speaks Voldemort's name. a dark door answering to darker authority, and for a moment he hesitates, realizing that even now he's using the power of the man he's come to defy. You can almost taste his unease in the damp air. Then, with the flick of a wand, they descend into the darkness. The cave is not merely a place. It's an atmosphere of dread, a symphony of echoes and dripping water. The boat that waits by the underground shore glimmers faintly under the greenish light, enchanted to move only when burdened by despair. Regulus steps in first, Creature following reluctantly, his small body shivering though no cold wind stirs here. "Do not speak," Regulus warns, his voice the kind of steady that hides panic. The boat drifts across the still black water, the reflections of unseen shapes writhing beneath the surface. You'd probably refuse to look down at all. Some truths aren't meant for mortal eyes, but Regulus keeps his gaze steady. When they reach the island, the locket lies gleaming on a pedestal, innocent as jewelry, malignant as betrayal. Creature whimpers softly. "It burns, master." "It is wrong," Regulus places a hand on the elf's shoulder. "I know." Then he raises his wand and begins the ritual to retrieve it, just as Creature described Voldemort doing before. The goblet fills with liquid as green as envy, shimmering faintly under the glow of the lake. "He made you drink this?" Regulus asks quietly. Creature nods, his lips trembling. "Yes, master." Creature drank it all. For a long moment, Regulus stares at the potion, his reflection warping in its surface. He understands now what must happen. The historical texts call this the last command of Regulus Black, and each version tries to romanticize it differently. But the truth is simpler and sadder. Regulus orders Creature to make him drink, no matter what happens. The elf protests, crying openly now. "Please, master, do not make Creature." "You will," Regulus interrupts gently. "That is an order." The words cut through the air like a spell. Creature obeys. You can imagine the sound, the goblet tipping, the first swallow burning down his throat. Regulus gasps, gripping his chest, his eyes wild for a moment as visions claw through his mind. The potion isn't poison in the physical sense. It's terror liquefied. It drags every fear, every guilt, every unspoken horror to the surface and forces you to drown in it. He drinks again and again, each gulp weaker, each protest smaller. Between gasps, he whispers things only the dead should hear, apologies to his brother, to his mother, to the boy he once was. "Make it stop," he pleads, voice cracking. Creature begs to end it, but Regulus shouts, "No, all of it." His face glistens with sweat and tears as he forces the final swallow down. Then the goblet is empty, and for a heartbeat, silence reigns. Regulus collapses, trembling violently. "Water," he rasps, but Creature has none left. Desperate, the elf scoops a handful from the black lake. That's when the water moves. They rise, pale and glistening. The Inferi, dozens of them, their bodies swaying gently in the gloom, eyes like dull lanterns. The potion's enchantment had called them. Creature screams as cold hands claw for the shore, dragging themselves toward the fallen wizard. Regulus forces himself upright, his wand flickering in his hand, casting blasts of light that vanish into the darkness. "Go!" he shouts. "Take it and go!" Creature refuses, tears streaking down his face. "Creature won't leave you!" But Regulus grabs him by the wrist, his strength flaring one last time. "That's an order!" he cries, thrusting the locket into the elf's hands. The Inferi close in, their whispers a chorus of the drowned. What happens next exists only in fragmented memory. Creature apparates home, choking on sobs, the locket clutched to his chest. Behind him, the cave collapses into silence. Some historians claim they found traces of defensive magic in the chamber centuries later, proof that Regulus fought to his last breath. Others believe he never lifted his wand again, that he simply let the Inferi take him, his death a quiet surrender. There's even a fringe theory that a trace of him lingers there still, guarding the cursed water like a watchful spirit. You can choose whichever version comforts you most, but all agree on this. Regulus Arcturus Black died a hero no one remembered. when Creature reappears in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. The sound is almost too loud for the silence that follows. He is shaking, soaked, sobbing without breath, clutching the cursed locket to his chest, as if it might still contain his master's heartbeat. The fire is dying in the hearth, the same fire before which Regulus once sat reading in peace, and its light catches the elf's trembling hands. "Master Regulus," Creature whispers again and again, as though the name alone could summon him back. But no one answers. Upstairs, the portraits sleep. The house is still. The proud black family, so obsessed with legacy, doesn't even stir to witness the only truly noble thing one of their blood has ever done. And so begins the long, lonely vigil of the Creature who knew too much. You can almost see it unfold like a tragic ritual. Creature hides the locket in the drawing room, wrapping it in a velvet cloth as though covering a wound, and waits for orders that will never come. He cleans because that's all he knows. He cooks for no one, sets tables for ghosts. In the weeks that follow, he grows thin and wild-eyed, muttering to himself about Master Regulus's task, about destroying the locket, about being forbidden to disobey. Every time he tries to damage it, the dark magic lashes back, sending him sprawling across the floor. Still, he tries again. That's devotion in its purest, most painful form, the kind that outlives its purpose. Historians later called this the Silent Mourning, a period when the black household became a tomb. One ministry record mentions that neighbors sometimes saw faint green light flickering through the shutters at night. Dark magic residue, they called it, though you might think of it more poetically. Regulus's unfinished promise refusing to fade. It's almost funny, in a grim way. The boy who spent his life trying to make his family proud ends up saving their name in secret, while his house falls to ruin. The irony would have made Sirius smirk if he'd known. The locket itself becomes an obsession. Creature guards it with the ferocity of a dragon and the sadness of a widow. When intruders, cousins, ministry officials, even house pests approach the drawing room, he drives them away with shrieks of, "Not Master Regulus's treasure!" There's a single surviving account from a cleaning wizard hired by the ministry to inspect abandoned homes after the war. He wrote that the elf spoke of his master as though he'd left only yesterday, though it must have been years. The way he looked at that locket, it was as if he believed it still breathed. That line alone, I think, tells you everything about how grief distorts time. There's an ongoing debate in wizarding scholarship about what truly motivated Regulus in his final act. The official record, the one eventually acknowledged by the ministry, frames it as a personal redemption story, a Death Eater turned martyr. But others, particularly in the fringe school of psychomagical ethics, argue that Regulus's choice stemmed from an instinct older than morality itself, the refusal to let cruelty define him. It wasn't about good or evil, one researcher famously wrote, but about symmetry. Regulus saw what Voldemort broke and tried, in his own small way, to mend it. You can almost imagine him smiling at that. A boy raised to believe in purity, finally choosing something truly pure, compassion. Creature, meanwhile, carries the memory like a burden stitched into his very being. Decades later, when Sirius returns to the house he swore never to enter again, he finds the elf half mad with guilt and grief. Master Regulus wanted it destroyed, Creature mutters. But Creature couldn't. Sirius, too lost in his own bitterness, doesn't understand. None of them do. Not until much later, when the pieces finally connect. The locket that once symbolized a family's arrogance becomes the object that redeems it. In a way, Regulus's legacy survives exactly as he might have wanted, not through statues or songs, but through an act of quiet endurance that outlived the noise of war. You can't help but feel that, had history been fairer, he'd be remembered alongside the greats. Dumbledore, Moody, the heroes of the Order. Instead, his name lingers like a whisper behind closed doors, known only to those who listen closely enough to the walls of number 12. And maybe that's fitting. Some courage doesn't need witnesses, it just needs to exist. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear him even now. The echo of a young man's voice in the dark, whispering to the house elf who became his only friend. Do it properly, Creature. Don't let it win. The sea took his body, but his words stayed. And in the strangest way, they were answered, not by his kin, but by a boy named Harry decades later, who would finally finish what Regulus began. Funny, isn't it, how even in death, the quiet ones end up shaping the loudest stories. Years pass like a slow enchantment, unnoticed, heavy, cruel. The world moves on, rebuilding itself after wars both magical and mundane, but number 12, Grimmauld Place, remains sealed in its own century of dust. Creature lingers in the hollow house, muttering Regulus's name as though each repetition keeps him tethered to a vanished master. Time to him isn't linear, it loops. Each morning, he half expects the young master to descend the stairs again, his robes crisp, his eyes focused, ready to issue another order. But the staircase stays empty. The house remains silent except for the ticking clock that no one winds anymore. You can imagine it. The damp air, the smell of old potions, the faint shimmer of protection spells that long outlived their purpose. Every corner holds an echo of Regulus's ghost, not in spirit, but in memory, which is often the stronger kind of haunting. The ministry eventually lists the Black Estate as dormant, too tainted by dark enchantments for safe reclamation. Historians, meanwhile, piece together rumors, fragments, and testimonies, each one slightly off, like reflections in cracked glass. One ministry archivist wrote that the story of Regulus Black was a tragedy obscured by pride and dust, and that's exactly right. Even in death, the world forgot him. Sirius never spoke his brother's name publicly, not out of cruelty, but out of pain too deep for language. He probably thought Regulus had died a loyal Death Eater, never knowing the truth that hid in plain sight. The elf who could have told him wasn't in any state to explain. It's almost unbearable to think of them both, two brothers raised under the same poisoned roof, dying for the same idea of freedom in completely different ways. Decades later, when the Order of the Phoenix reclaims Grimmauld Place, it's no longer a home, it's a relic. The walls still hum faintly with old enchantments. Portraits whisper curses, and the air smells of long-dead lilies and forgotten regret. Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger step cautiously through the darkness, unaware that the house they now use as a hideout once held one of the war's first acts of defiance. It's Hermione, of course, who finds the locket in a cluttered cabinet, its chain coiled like a snake, the Slytherin insignia still gleaming faintly in the dust. Just another cursed trinket, she mutters, not realizing what it truly is. Creature, hiding nearby, hisses softly, his eyes wet. Master Regulus tried to destroy it, he whispers, his voice trembling. And in that moment, just like that, history shifts. The academic debates about this discovery still fill volumes. Some argue that it's poetic fate that Harry should finish the mission begun by another boy of almost the same age decades before. Others dismiss it as coincidence. But there's a small, beautiful truth embedded in that chain of events. One act of courage, buried by time, became the foundation for another. Regulus's hand guided Harry's without either of them knowing. That's the kind of legacy you can't manufacture with monuments or medals. It's worth pausing here to remember that wizarding history is rarely fair. The ministry didn't add Regulus's name to the official roll of war heroes until nearly 20 years after Voldemort's final defeat. Even then, it was a quiet amendment, tucked between larger announcements. A few magical newspapers published short obituaries. The Daily Prophet's headline read, "Reformed Death Eater's final act saved the world." Hardly a fitting epitaph. But the smaller wizarding communities, the ones who'd lost sons and daughters to the war, spoke his name differently. For them, Regulus became a kind of mythic figure, the proof that even those raised in darkness could find the courage to step into the light, if only for a moment. There's one particular historian, Elspeth Roll, no relation to the infamous Death Eater family, who wrote the most haunting description of Regulus's final legacy. She said, "He never wanted redemption. He wanted balance." That phrase has been quoted endlessly in academic circles, etched onto plaques, even woven into modern magical ethics courses. but it also speaks to something simpler, the human ache to matter, even when no one's looking. When Harry finally learns the truth from Creature, he does what Regulus once could not. He destroys the locket. The moment the Horcrux shatters, it's as if a ghost exhales for the first time in decades. You can almost imagine, just for a heartbeat, that somewhere deep beneath the Black Lake, the water stirs. Not with horror this time, but with peace. The chain of mercy, begun by one quiet boy in a house that worshipped cruelty, finally closes. It's strange, isn't it? How history rarely rewards the loud, the cruel, or the powerful in the way they expect, but always finds a way to immortalize the quiet act of someone no one noticed. Regulus Black, the obedient son, the forgotten brother, became the hinge on which fate turned. You could call that destiny, or coincidence, or divine irony, but perhaps it's simpler than that. Perhaps in the end, the universe remembers courage the way the sea remembers the moon, through endless quiet waves that never stop reaching for the shore. Years after the war ends, long after the noise fades and the monuments rise, the house at number 12 Grimmauld Place still stands, unchanged, unwelcoming, and utterly quiet. The war heroes have gone on to their lives, the ministry prints new textbooks, and children at Hogwarts whisper about legends, Harry's courage, Dumbledore's wisdom, Snape's sacrifice. But none of them talk about Regulus Arcturus Black. He isn't on the chocolate frog cards, and no moving portrait ever bore his likeness. Yet when the wind howls down Grimmauld Place, something unseen stirs behind the boarded windows, like a house remembering. Perhaps that's the closest thing to a haunting, an idea refusing to die. You step into that dim corridor again, dust swirling in the light, the smell of age and silence pressing against you. The old family tapestry still hangs crooked, faded but intact. Sirius's name remains burned away, a black scar in the pattern. But there, just beside it, is Regulus's mark, soft gold thread still visible, the only one that seems untouched by time. It's as if the house itself refuses to forget him. You can almost imagine Creature still moving through the rooms, old and slow now, muttering to himself as he tends the fire. He no longer fears sunlight. He no longer hides the locket. It's gone, destroyed, its curse undone. But sometimes he sits in the kitchen, staring at the wall where his master once stood, and whispers, "Master Regulus did it. He really did it." There's a dignity in his words, a kind of prayer that transcends time. The historians call this the quiet redemption of the House of Black, but I think it's simpler than that. It's just the echo of loyalty fulfilled. Wizarding scholars still argue about what Regulus's story means. Was he the first to resist Voldemort from within? Was he merely a frightened boy trying to undo a mistake? You could debate the details forever, but maybe that's missing the point. He was proof that courage doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers. He showed that it's possible to step away from everything you've been taught, even if it kills you. In that sense, he's the most human kind of hero, flawed, scared, and quietly defiant. One magical historian, a poet more than an academic, once wrote that Regulus's death wasn't the extinguishing of a flame, but the passing of a torch. And when you think about it, she's right. Without him, the final victory might never have come. When Harry grows older, he visits Grimmauld Place again. The war is over, the house less sinister, the air lighter somehow. He stands before the tapestry and traces Regulus's name with his fingers. "Thank you," he says softly, though there's no one to hear. He doesn't stay long. Heroes rarely do. But as he leaves, a faint shimmer moves across the old fabric, like candlelight catching gold thread. Maybe it's just magic settling. Maybe it's something else. There's a small plaque now in the corner of the house, one only visitors who know where to look can find. It reads simply, "Regulus Arcturus Black, who turned back when none else dared." No dates, no titles, no embellishments. Just a line, quiet and dignified, fitting for someone whose bravery spoke in whispers. Children who come to learn about the war sometimes overlook it entirely, walking right past the plaque without noticing. But a few, the curious ones, stop and ask, "Who was he?" And that's enough. Memory doesn't need crowds, it just needs one person who still asks the question. When you step back outside into the cold London night, the street feels peaceful again. The wind hums low, and the old house watches in silence, its windows glinting faintly beneath the street lamps. Somewhere, far away, the sea moves over the cave that claimed him, calm now, no longer cruel. Maybe the water knows. Maybe it carries his story in the rhythm of its waves. The tale of a boy who defied a monster not with spells or armies, but with a single, quiet act of conscience. And in that way, the world still turns for him. Now, as our story draws to a close, take a deep breath. Let the sound of the sea fade to a gentle murmur. Let the dim corridors of Grimmauld Place dissolve into quiet light. The tale of Regulus Black doesn't end with tragedy. It ends with balance. His silence became legacy. His sacrifice became seed, and his name, once a whisper in the dark, is finally part of the light. So, rest easy now. You've walked through the shadows of a boy who tried to do right in a world that punished goodness. You've seen how even in the darkest lineage, compassion can bloom. Close your eyes, let the echoes settle, and remember, some stories aren't meant to shout. They're meant to linger. Now, dim the lights once more. Let the hum of the world carry you and drift softly into sleep, because courage, in its quietest form, will always find you in the dark.